Beijing ordered the U.S. consulate in Chengdu to shut down in retaliation to a recent move by the U.S. And this isn't the first time the consulate got caught in a political drama. After the historical China speech by the Secretary of State, a Chinese dissident said Mike Pompeo told him the hard stance on China will last for decades. The Yangtze River basin is facing heavy rain again. Authorities submerged some areas intentionally to save other richer areas, but the farmers aren't happy. A couple in Hong Kong refused to stop fighting for freedom, even if it cost them their wedding. They were put into jail for 4 days last year, and the judge acquitted them today. And as the U.S. and allies push back against Beijing's long-standing aggressions in the South China Sea, China announced a live firing drill. Another country joins the list of rejecting China's territorial claims in that area. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Beijing has ordered one of the U.S. consulates in China to close in an apparent act of retaliation. It follows Washington's decision to close down the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas this week. China's foreign ministry said it informed the U.S. embassy about its decision on Friday morning. Chengdu is one of 5 U.S. consulates in mainland China, with a 6th major mission in Hong Kong. Beijing's decision came just 2 days after the U.S. State Department ordered the Chinese consulate in Houston to close to protect American intellectual property. On Wednesday, President Trump said it's always possible that more Chinese missions in the United States would be forced to close. In Chengdu City, a large number of armed police arrived at the U.S. consulate there at around 7 in the morning on Friday. Even more police may have come later. A video showed at least 9 police cars driving to the consulate. Police set up a blockade area to keep people and vehicles away as plainclothes police surrounded the consulate general. Police were also seen monitoring the building from above. Locals were blocked from approaching the consulate's entrance. Even standing near the building at a distance was prohibited. A photographer for an overseas media outlet was seen working nearby, but a policeman soon approached him to demand that he not film or photograph the scene. The Chinese Communist Party's media mouthpiece, CCTV, set up several cameras facing the main entrance of the consulate building, as well as in other locations. They were used to live stream the event, and by 3 p.m. local time, there are already more than 20 million viewers. In the evening, smoke started rising into the air. It wasn't coming from inside the consulate, but from outside instead. It was later discovered that someone set off fireworks nearby the entrance. A man in a white shirt was quickly seized by police afterward. So far, there's no report about a potential motive. Amid the recent controversy, now we take a closer look at the U.S. consulates in China and Chinese consulates in the U.S. The United States has 1 embassy in Beijing and 5 consulates general in Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenyang, Wuhan, and Chengdu. Among them, the area surrounding Chengdu has the weakest economic development and the fewest financial ties to the U.S. The consulate in Chengdu opened in 1985 under President Bush Sr.'s administration. In addition, the United States also has consulates general for Hong Kong and Macau. Hong Kong was formerly a British colony, while Macau was a Portuguese colony. Both were returned to China in the late 90s. On the other side, China has an embassy in Washington, D.C., and 5 consulates general in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston. But the building in Houston was ordered to close by the Trump administration this week. The deadline set by Beijing for the U.S. to close its consulate in Chengdu is next Monday. It's not yet clear if Washington will comply. But a post from the wife of the U.S. Consul General in Chengdu earlier this week caught public attention. She posted it on Monday before Beijing ordered the consulate in Chengdu to close. Zhu Yizhuang Mulinax, wife of the U.S. Consul General in Chengdu, Jim Mulinax, wrote on Facebook that her husband could return to the United States at the end of this month, but added that he's been instructed to stay in Chengdu. 1 day later, U.S. authorities ordered the Chinese consulate in Houston to close within 72 hours. Mrs. Mulinax is from Taiwan. Months ago, due to the pandemic, Ms. Mulinax returned to the U.S. with her children, while her husband, the consul, had to stay in China. The U.S. responds to China's order to shut down an American consulate. The White House press secretary urges the Chinese regime to avoid engaging in tit-for-tat retaliation. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the U.S.-China consulate conflict.
A response from the White House to the regime after it ordered a U.S. consulate in China to shut down hours after a Chinese consulate met with the same fate in Houston.
Yes, our action to direct the closure of the PRC Consulate General in Houston was taken to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information. And we urge the CCP to cease these malign actions rather than engage in tit-for-tat retaliation. So that's where
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called the Chinese consulate a hub of spying and intellectual property theft. The New York Times reported that they obtained a document outlining several FBI investigations tied to the Houston consulate, which included attempts to illegally transfer medical research from institutions in the area. The Chinese Communist Party defended its order to close, accusing the U.S. consulate of interfering in China's domestic affairs and harming China's security interests.
The measure taken by China is a legitimate and necessary response to the unreasonable action by the U.S.
But the Chinese consulate in Houston isn't the only one accused of criminal and questionable activities. Earlier this year, the Chinese consulate in Chicago sent a draft resolution to Wisconsin State Senator Roger Roth. They asked him to propose the resolution, which praised the CCP's efforts to stop the spread of the virus.
I mean, what they tried to get the free people of Wisconsin to do in passing a sham resolution that they wrote, full of propaganda, supporting their cover-up in the COVID-19 pandemic, that was alarming and shocking and should be to any free person in the world.
Roth says he fully supports the Trump administration's decision to shut down the consulate in Houston, and he says it would be great for Americans and the Chinese people if the CCP operated their consulates with sincerity.
But recent events have shown us that the Chinese government, the CCP, is operating their consulates in a completely different way, and it should be alarming to every American to know that we have more or less these forward operating bases on American soil that are systematically undermining our businesses, our academia, and our government.
Roth says that he wouldn't be surprised if what was happening in Houston is being replicated in other Chinese consulates, in which case he would support a similar order to close. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Of the 5 U.S. consulates in mainland China, Beijing ordered the one in Chengdu to shut down. But this isn't the first time the Chengdu consulate got caught up in a political drama. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
China ordered the U.S. consulates in southwestern Chengdu to close, a form of retaliation after the U.S. ordered the shutdown of the Chinese embassy in Houston within 72 hours. This isn't the first time the Chengdu consulate was caught in the middle of political drama. The consulate previously made headlines when a Chinese official defected from China and fled there to escape. It triggered China's biggest political scandal in recent decades to the extent that it even rocked the Communist Party's top leadership. That official was Wang Lijun, former police chief of a megacity in China's southwest. In 2012, he fled to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu to ask for asylum. At the time, Chinese security forces surrounded the consulate building. Wang stayed inside until Beijing authorities came to take him into custody. Wang had information linking his then-boss, Bo Xilai, to the death of a British businessman. Bo was a top political figure and was on his way to becoming one of China's most powerful men. But after the consulate incident, Bo was removed from his post, arrested, and sentenced to life in prison. Bo's oust later led to the downfall of his key ally, Zhou Yongkang. Zhou was one of the members that sits at the very top of the ruling party, but was also sentenced to life for bribery and abuse of power. The two were reportedly planning a coup against Chinese leader Xi Jinping. After Xi came to power in 2013, he started a nationwide anti-corruption campaign, which led to Zhou's ouster. But Zhou's downfall is a rarity. In recent decades, party leaders at the very top will usually never face implication for crime. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo delivered a hard-hitting speech yesterday on U.S.-China relations. In it, he called for the triumph of the free nations over the new tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. Speaking at the Nixon Presidential Library on Thursday, Pompeo brought up the former president, saying Nixon worked with China to build on mutual benefits and obligations that respected America's bedrock national interests.
President Nixon once said he feared he had created a Frankenstein by opening the world to the CCP. And here we are.
Pompeo said that in the more than 4 decades since the U.S. normalized relations with the Chinese Communist Party, China has not liberalized as many had hoped.
We, the freedom-loving nations of the world, must induce China to change, just as President Nixon wanted. We must induce China to change in more creative and assertive ways because Beijing's actions threaten our people and our prosperity.
Pompeo implored democracies to work together to defend against expansive threats posed by the CCP, calling it a choice between freedom and tyranny. He pointed to the CCP being a fundamentally Marxist-Leninist regime and a threat that poses to a free world. He pulled from his observations of the Soviet Union during his service in the army amid the Cold War. He said communists always lie and that the key is to watch how they behave, not their words. Based on that, Pompeo said the U.S. should approach the regime from the standpoint of distrust and verify, adapting former President Ronald Reagan's famous words regarding negotiations with the Soviet Union: trust but verify.
Securing our freedoms from the Chinese Communist Party is the mission of our time, and America is perfectly positioned to lead it because our founding principles give us that opportunity.
Pompeo's remarks capped a series of speeches by top administration officials in recent weeks, seeking to spotlight the CCP's malign actions in the U.S. and around the world. It came as Washington pushes back against the Chinese regime for its technology theft, human rights violations, and military aggression. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's speech comes after a week of escalating U.S.-China relations, with Washington's order for China to close its Houston consulate, a move for which Beijing said it must retaliate.
They say democracy comes at a price. For Wei Jingsheng, that price was 17 years in a Chinese labor camp, all for posting a pro-democracy essay in 1978 on Beijing's short-lived democracy wall. But today, Wei said decades of effort to awaken people about the Chinese Communist Party haven't been in vain.
Also with us today is the father of the Chinese democracy movement, Wei Jingsheng. He spent decades in Chinese labor camps for his advocacy. Mr. Wei, will you please stand?
Wei said the unprecedented recognition of him, a dissident, means the U.S. is truly separating the voice of the Chinese people from that of the ruling regime. He met with the chief diplomat after Thursday's historical China speech in Los Angeles, where Pompeo declared that the decades-long active engagement with the Chinese Communist regime has failed. Wei said the choice of the venue, the Nixon Library, has significance. Nearly 50 years ago, then President Richard Nixon made the trip to China that started the two countries' relationships.
The venue has a symbolic meaning. It means that the U.S. is going to have another complete change of its China policy. And its main goals now are to unite other countries to counter the CCP and to push for China's democracy.
Wei said he raised a question asked by many Chinese people to Pompeo. How long is the U.S. able to keep its firm stance against the CCP?
He explained that this policy is not something they thought of just recently. It will last for many years. It will last for decades. That's the word he used. That basically means that this policy won't change until the Communist Party is taken down, until China walks the path of democracy.
But as Communist China's economy grows, the two countries remain intertwined in trade and other areas. Wei said there's bound to be damage to the U.S. side.
But Mr. Pompeo said when he answered our questions that the U.S. is willing to take such damage in order to uphold its policies. Even if the CCP drives all of our diplomats out of China, our policies still won't change. It's a very assertive attitude.
Wei attributes the change to the awakening of the American people.
The U.S. is a democratic country. When the U.S. people haven't awakened to the threats, it's easy for politicians to play some tricks to appease the CCP and get some benefits as a result. But once the American people awaken, the entire political atmosphere will change. I've noticed some CCP-friendly politicians getting tougher against China right now. Therefore, the American people and their votes are eventually more important than China's money.
In the meeting with Pompeo, Wei mentioned the increasing number of Chinese people quitting the Communist Party after news about a potential travel ban against party members was revealed.
He said this policy is definitely going to be implemented, but the details of the specifics are still being designed and haven't been settled on yet.
Wei said his understanding is that the ban mainly targets CCP agents. The potential order would offer legal tools to punish Chinese spies in the U.S., but isn't meant to affect ordinary Chinese people. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Today was the deadline for the Chinese consulate in Houston. The consulate was ordered to close to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information. Some came to protest against China human rights violations, while staff moved the last of their belongings out.
After nearly 41 years of the Chinese consulate here in Houston, the building is stripped of the Chinese Communist Party flag. Protesters stood outside as they moved out. We asked why they felt it was important to be there.
I don't agree with what's going on with the CCP, persecution of the Uyghurs, and then the persecution of Falun Gong. Falun Gong is literally just meditation. I don't know how you can hate someone for meditating. That's not, and for the state to say that, for a government right to say that, it's unbelievable. No, this is not an overnight issue. This is something that's going to go on until either the CCP is down or until they will stop the persecution of the Uyghurs and especially Falun Gong as well.
One Chinese man who calls himself Texas Cowboy says that now's the time that the whole free world is standing up to the CCP.
Nowadays, in the whole international community, besides US, there are also other countries, the ones who love democracy, now stand united to regard the CCP as an illegitimate government to prepare to take down the CCP.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the closure is meant to set clear expectations for the CCP's behavior and show that if they don't behave as expected, actions will be taken to protect the American people. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Today's official closure leaves just 4 of the Chinese consulates open in the U.S., and the president says it may not be the last, saying that it's always possible for further closures of Chinese diplomatic outposts. 4 people have been charged with visa fraud. All of them are suspected of hiding their ties to the Chinese military. If convicted, each faces a maximum of 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. All 4 were involved with research at multiple universities and lied about their involvement with the Chinese military. One of them is a fugitive Chinese researcher at the University of California. She took refuge at the San Francisco Chinese consulate. Prosecutors say her case demonstrates the Chinese consulate in San Francisco provides a potential safe harbor for an official to avoid prosecution in the U.S. In addition to their arrests, the FBI is looking into similar visa fraud in 25 cities, which are also suspected to be affiliated with the Chinese military. The Assistant Attorney General for National Security called it part of the CCP's plan to take advantage of our open society and exploit academic institutions. Now to the floods in China. The Yangtze River basin is facing heavy rain again. In some cities, water level exceeds the overflow warning level by 6 feet. Since June, it rained 50% more than usual for this time of year and reached a record high in almost 60 years. The floodgates of a dam in Anhui province were opened. Floodwater spilled out into the fields. About 200,000 people were affected. Many crops were submerged by the flood. Fish and shrimp in the pond were washed away. This is part of the plan to protect places downstream from floods, such as Shanghai, which is much richer than Anhui. Chinese state-run media praised people in Anhui province for giving up their home to save others. But not all the people in Anhui are proud of themselves. One netizen said, "But for us farmers, we have spent all we had to plant and grow 50 acres of rice. It cost a lot of money, contracting fees, seed fees, pesticide fees, labor fees, and now it is just submerged in the water. We really don't know how to face the future." Now we turn to the CCP virus situation in the northeastern Chinese city of Dalian. More cases are emerging in the city. In public spaces, workers in personal protective gear are seen spraying disinfectant. All local kindergarteners have been ordered to close. Metro line passengers must receive a negative virus test result before they're allowed to board. A video captured Friday shows passengers waiting outside a metro station to take a virus test before boarding the train, causing major delays for commuters. Theaters, game rooms, cultural centers, internet cafes, and dance halls, among others, have been temporarily closed. Now we turn to a Chinese real estate tycoon and a vocal critic of the Communist Party leadership. Ren Zhiqiang has been expelled from the party and is facing prosecution. He is accused of serious violations of the law, smearing the image of the party and country. Authorities also targeted Ren's family, accusing him of colluding with his child to accumulate wealth without restraint. Ren's father was a former Chinese deputy minister. Ren belongs to the so-called party princelings, but he took a different road than most other princelings. Ren has earned a nickname from netizens, Ren the Big Cannon, for his bold critiques posted on social media. He called the Chinese leader a clown and emperor when he talked about China's handling with the CCP virus, although he did not mention Xi Jinping by name. He also denounced Xi's concentration of power and the ways Beijing tries to promote itself. The CCP announced that Ren's resisting the party's investigation into him suggests Ren has refused to admit any wrongdoing. Now to the South China Sea. The Chinese army announced a live fire drill on the border of the South China Sea in response to the growing tension in the area. The drill will begin on Saturday and last for more than a week. A U.S. anti-submarine patrol aircraft entered into the South China Sea from waters south of Taiwan on Thursday. Later the same day, a U.S. surveillance aircraft, another anti-submarine patrol aircraft, and 2 U.S. air tankers appeared in the area. Australia has notified China and the United Nations that it rejects all of China's territorial claims in the South China Sea and considers all such claims as unlawful. Now we hear the heartbreaking story of a couple in Hong Kong who refused to stop fighting for freedom, even if it cost them their wedding. They were arrested last year during the city's pro-democracy protests and put into jail just 4 days before their wedding, and the judge acquitted them today.
Henry and Elaine, a couple from Hong Kong, spent 50 hours in jail in July of last year. The incident took place just 4 days before their wedding. Arrested at a pro-democracy protest, the couple were kept in different cells at the police station, separated by a long corridor and a large wall. They were among the first people to be arrested for protesting for their freedom. After they were released, they held their wedding but only expected 4 guests. Henry didn't even invite his family. That's because the couple had received online threats that someone would crash and spoil their wedding and that guests might be bullied online.
Rioting is a very serious charge. We and our friends knew we were targeted by the government once we were charged with rioting. Some of our friends were worried about online bullying after they attended our wedding ceremony, but they still came. It really showcased the love of Hong Kongers.
To their surprise, dozens of family members, friends, and people they hadn't even met before showed up for their special day. Journalists also came and live-streamed the ceremony on social media as if it were a royal wedding, not of 2 people accused of a serious crime. But they still had open charges and were to be tried for rioting, an offense that carries a penalty of up to 10 years in jail. Elaine cried sometimes when talking about the separation she felt was sure to come, and fretted over what would happen to the couple's 3 dogs, who they say are like children to them. Nearly a year after they were first arrested, the newlyweds were tried on rioting charges. The couple lost 2/3 of their income during that year because of public criticism, but thankfully the judge acquitted them and they were free to go. Elaine says she doesn't regret standing up for what she believes in.
It's my responsibility to speak out for injustice and for the future. When I look back at my life, what made me proud? I really think that even though I was arrested, I am still proud. I don't regret standing up. I am scared of being jailed, but I don't regret it.
Elaine and Henry wept and embraced. Supporters applauded and chanted pro-democracy slogans as the couple walked out of the courthouse. Henry said they would head home immediately to take care of the dogs, while Elaine said they would start to unpack their gym equipment to get back to work.
And on Friday, China reacted to a week of escalating tensions and ordered the U.S. to shut down its consulate in the southwestern city of Chengdu. We met up with the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu to hear her thoughts on the recent developments. All right, so thanks, Annie, so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany.
So there seems to be a lot of recent developments between the U.S. and China, especially after Pompeo's speech yesterday. So can you tell us a little bit about a brief summary of the most recent developments today?
Yes, so overnight, the Chinese authorities announced that the Chengdu U.S. consulate will be closed. This is in retaliation to the United States' previous action announced this week that the Chinese consulate in Houston will be closed. And earlier today, the U.S. authorities also confirmed that a Chinese researcher who was wanted by the FBI, who had been hiding in the San Francisco consulate, is now confirmed to have been detained, and she's scheduled to appear before court today.
And so regarding the consulate issue, what does that mean for the future?
Yes, so we are in uncharted territory here in terms of the U.S. and China relations since diplomatic relations were formally established in 1979. This hasn't happened before. This is quite an escalation in tensions. Both the United States and China have said that they will close their respective consulate in a major city. So what we're seeing here is more tension that may not be easily resolvable in the near future. So we'll have to see in the coming days whether the U.S. or Chinese side will announce further retaliation or further actions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. Hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you.
One Chinese hotel owner reports suffering unfair treatment at the hands of the regime. In our exclusive three-part interview, she exposes the problems private businesses face due to China's government and legal systems. In part two, Ms. Wang, who now lives in the U.S., says running a private Chinese company is wrought with difficulty.
Wang Ruiqing, the founder of the East Lake Company, says privately owned companies in China face a continuous struggle. She explained that they are forced to cope with heavy taxes and various kinds of fees and bribery demands from both officials and the legal system. They must also dedicate a huge amount of time to dealing with local authorities. Wang described one example of their burden when she witnessed the new fire chief inspecting local safety protocols. Before long, the chief has shut down many restaurants and businesses that were allegedly unqualified. By that afternoon, the fire department's lobby was crowded with anxious business owners and their secretaries, most of them holding bulging black bags stuffed with cash.
They were waiting for the new fire marshal with bribes in hand. The building was full of them, and many were on the phone asking about who knew the new chief. Many incidents like this happen. As soon as the bribe money is given, the problem is solved. But does the fire safety actually improve?
Wang says the reality Chinese business owners face is painful. Behind the scenes, they deal with complaints and scolding from regime authorities.
There was a coal boss in Shanxi who made a lot of money. After he sold his coal mine, he moved to another city, Shenzhen. He then never dealt with any officials again. Just imagine what a life he had lived in Shanxi and how much he hated these officials.
Wang came to the United States 2 years ago. She felt as a former business owner in China, she should stand up and speak out. In May, Wang released an open letter addressed to all members of China's biggest annual political meetings, calling on them to oust Communist Party leader Xi Jinping.
If I were still in China, I wouldn't dare to say it. I know that there are quite a few officials of different levels who actually see very clearly that this country is rapidly sliding into disaster.
Beijing was enraged by her message. Officials set up a task force to specifically look into her background. In China, Wang had served as a provincial Christianity secretary. The task force soon dismissed all church personnel who were associated with Ms. Wang from their positions. They also tore down the church where she had worked on Easter Sunday. According to China's official figures, there are more than 20 million Christians in the country. By law, they're only allowed to join so-called official churches whose clergy are appointed by the Communist Party and who accept the leadership of the CCP. But there are also Christians who belong to unofficial churches. They face suppression much more often. To protect her children and family in China from police harassment, Wang had to sign a statement severing all ties with them.
I feel that a country can't be so bloody tyrannical to its people like this. Anyone who is working hard on the country and promoting democracy is subjected to persecution. So everyone should stand up against this like I did.
Wang says the deterioration of the business climate amid the CCP virus pandemic is further squeezing China's private business owners. Adding to the constant suppression by Chinese authorities, she says many will soon start preparing exit plans to escape if they haven't already.